In our last video, we began a journey into the hidden chambers of scientific history. We pulled back the curtain to reveal the minds of the women who shaped our world from behind the shadows. Women whose brilliance powered the atom, measured the universe, rewrote the laws of physics, and built the foundations of wireless communication. We told their stories because the world had forgotten them. We spoke their names because time had tried to erase them. We resurrected their legacies because history is not complete without them. But even after uncovering Lise Meitner's calm defiance, Chien-Shiung Wu's experimental revolution, Henrietta Leavitt's cosmic vision, Jocelyn Bell Burnell's discovery of the singing stars, and Hedy Lamarr's blueprint for the digital age, even after all of that, our story was not finished. The deeper we looked into the fabric of modern science, the more we realized something profound. There are still more names missing, more minds uncelebrated, more women whose contributions shape the world we live in, yet remain buried in the margins of textbooks, forgotten in the footnotes of papers, lost behind the loudest voices of their time. Part 1 was only the beginning. Now we continue. In the middle of the 20th century, that question hung over every chalkboard, every laboratory, every launch pad. The sky had been humanity's ceiling for millennia, and now men in white shirts and narrow ties were drawing lines through space, mapping paths no human had ever walked. But behind those chalkboards, behind the equations that would carry astronauts through the vacuum of the unknown, stood a woman whose presence was never meant to be part of the official story. A woman born in a segregated America. A woman whose school books were hand-me-downs, whose classrooms were run by people who believed her mind had limits. A woman who never accepted the world's definition of her potential. Her name was Katherine Johnson, and when the age of spaceflight began, she was the one who turned the impossible into something that could be calculated, something that could be flown. Before she ever touched the mathematics that would send rockets beyond gravity, Katherine knew numbers as if they were language. She grew up counting everything: stars, steps, patterns in the trees. Numbers were faithful. They didn't lie. They didn't discriminate. They didn't care about race or gender or the thin, invisible lines society drew around people like her. By the time she was 10, she was in high school. By 18, she was shining in university classrooms that had never expected a black girl to sit in them. When she graduated summa cum laude, with degrees in both mathematics and French, there was no NASA waiting for her. No laboratories eager to welcome her mind. The world had not yet imagined a place where someone like Katherine Johnson could stand among the architects of the future. So she taught. She raised children. She waited for a moment the world didn't know it would need. And then the space race arrived. NASA wasn't NASA yet. It was NACA, an agency of engineers and pilots trying to understand airflow, pressure, turbulence, and it needed computers, not the machines that hum on desks today. The humankind. Rows of women who sat in segregated rooms, running calculations that determined how high a plane could fly, how fast a wing could sweep, how a prototype might spin or shatter in the wind tunnels. Black women were placed in a building called the West Area Computing Unit. They had separate bathrooms, separate dining rooms, separate pathways into the future they were helping build. When Katherine Johnson arrived, she was assigned to that group. But segregation could not contain the size of her talent. Her supervisor quickly realized she didn't just compute solutions, she understood them. She saw the mathematics behind the mathematics. She made connections engineers overlooked. Her mind moved with a clarity that was almost musical. so they borrowed her. One day, an engineer asked if she could help with a set of flight test calculations. The next day, she was seated in the Flight Research Division, her desk the only one occupied by a black woman in the room. And then something remarkable happened. Whenever Katherine asked to attend the briefing meetings, the technical discussions where equations were born and problems were solved, she was told, "Computers don't go to meetings." But Katherine Johnson wasn't a machine, and she had never lived her life according to the rules of expectation. "Is there a law against it?" she asked. There wasn't. So she went, and the men who had once seen her as a background figure began to realize something unsettling. She knew the equations better than they did. She could see the trajectory of a flight before it was sketched on the board. She could turn a set of differential equations into a pathway through the sky. She could find errors before the chalk hit the floor. Katherine Johnson did not simply compute, she interpreted. She became part of the team plotting the first American into space, Alan Shepard, calculating the arc his capsule would take as it rose above the atmosphere and fell back toward the ocean. Every number mattered. Every decimal place was a heartbeat. One mistake could mean death. And Katherine didn't make mistakes. When Shepard's flight succeeded, the country celebrated the engineers, the astronauts, and the shimmering promise of American ambition. Few learned her name, but her name was etched deeper into history when the next challenge arrived. A machine, a brand new IBM computer, a system that promised to calculate orbital trajectories faster than any human. NASA was preparing to send John Glenn, the first American, into orbit, a mission infinitely more complex than Shepard's brief flight. Orbital mechanics were brutal. They demanded precision beyond anything NASA had attempted. The IBM computer-produced numbers, but nobody fully trusted the machine yet. No one, except John Glenn himself, trusted just the printouts. So he requested something extraordinary. He said, "Get the girl to check the numbers. If she says they're good, then I'm ready to go." The girl, Katherine Johnson, the mind behind the orbit. While reporters wrote about rockets and bravery, Katherine sat with sharpened pencils, long sheets of paper, and an equation that circled the Earth. She derived the trajectory by hand, every entry point, every re-entry angle, every gravitational consideration. She checked the computer. The computer was right, but the computer was only trusted because she confirmed it. On February 20th, 1962, John Glenn orbited the Earth 3 times. He splashed down safely. America triumphed. The world applauded. And yet, when newspapers wrote the story, Katherine Johnson's name was not printed. When headlines proclaimed the victory, her hands, the hands that had guided a man through orbit, stayed invisible. But history, even when delayed, has a way of returning to the truth. Katherine Johnson went on to calculate trajectories for Apollo missions. She worked on the mathematics that guided Apollo 11 to the moon. She contributed to the equations that would define Skylab. She helped bring astronauts safely through atmospheric re-entry, again and again. Her career spanned decades. Her legacy spans generations. Katherine Johnson did not stand on a launch pad, but the rockets rose because of her. She did not strap into a capsule, but astronauts entrusted their lives to the certainty of her work. America did not simply go to space. Katherine Johnson carried it there. The quiet genius, the human computer, the woman who turned the language of the universe into a path mankind could walk. And when she finally received national recognition, late in life, long after the world had already benefited from her brilliance, she accepted it with the same calm dignity she carried into every calculation. She once said, "We always worked as a team. It was never just me. But the truth is this: without Katherine Johnson, the story of spaceflight is not possible. She is one of the invisible architects of the modern world, no longer hidden, no longer footnoted, no longer erased. Her equations became flight, her mind became navigation, her courage became history, and now her story continues into the light. Dorothy Vaughan, the codebreaker of NASA, before America reached for the moon, before astronauts became icons and rockets became symbols of national pride, there was a war being fought on the ground, a quiet war of numbers, equations, predictions, and machines. And in that war, one woman stood at the center of a transformation she could not yet name. Her name was Dorothy Vaughan. If Katherine Johnson was the navigator of the space age, Dorothy was the bridge between two worlds, the world of human computation and the world of the machines that would one day replace it. She was the mind who saw the future coming, long before the future understood it needed her. Long before NASA was NASA, when it was still NACA, an agency built on aerodynamics and test flights, Dorothy Vaughan was hired as a mathematician in the West Area Computing Group, a segregated workspace, separate bathrooms, separate coffee pots, separate tables in the cafeteria. But segregation could not contain brilliance, and Dorothy Vaughan possessed a rare kind of intelligence, not just the ability to solve problems, but the ability to foresee them. She was a woman who looked at a system, any system, and saw its weaknesses, its opportunities, and the quiet openings where change could be made. When she walked into the West Computers building, she saw more than a job. She saw potential. For herself. For every black woman hired after her. For every mind society tried to push to the margins. Dorothy did not raise her voice. She did not demand attention. She led through stillness, through presence, through the simple, powerful act of being excellent in a world that expected her to disappear. She became the supervisor of the West Area Computers, the first black supervisor in the agency's history. She managed dozens of women, guided them, trained them, defended them when their talents were dismissed, and pushed them into roles men insisted they were not prepared for. Dorothy Vaughan was a leader before NASA had a word for women like her. But something else was happening, something that would soon threaten every computing job in the building. A new machine arrived, a towering, humming, blinking IBM computer, the kind that filled entire rooms and required engineers just to keep it breathing. Its arrival was both a promise and a warning. The future of computation would not be done on paper. The women of West Computing knew what this meant. Their jobs that had lifted them into the scientific world, were suddenly in jeopardy. But Dorothy Vaughan did not panic. She planned. While others saw a threat, she saw an opportunity. She saw a bridge. She went into the IBM room. She studied the machine. She asked questions the engineers did not expect her to ask. And then she discovered something critical. The IBM computer was powerful, yes, but it was helpless without one thing: a language. Fortran, the programming language that would command the future. So Dorothy Vaughan taught herself Fortran, alone, at night, with borrowed manuals, with pages filled with symbols no one had explained to her, with a determination that felt like prophecy. And then she taught the women around her, quietly preparing them for a future NASA did not yet realize it needed. So when the IBM computer began to fail, when it jammed, stalled, or produced results no one could interpret, Dorothy Vaughan walked into the machine room with the calm of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. She reprogrammed it. She aligned the punch cards. She coaxed the machine into accuracy. She taught the engineers how it worked. The future had arrived, and Dorothy Vaughan was already fluent in it. Soon, the West computers, the women segregated from the rest of the agency, became essential to NASA's transition into the digital era. They were no longer simply calculators. They were programmers, engineers, architects of the machine age. And when NASA finally desegregated its workforce, Dorothy Vaughan did something extraordinary. She stepped aside, not because she lacked ambition, not because she was unqualified, but because she believed that leadership meant clearing the path for others, not standing at the front of it. She ensured that Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, and countless others stepped into roles NASA had never intended to give them. Her legacy is not just in the missions she contributed to. It is in the people she lifted with her. Dorothy Vaughan didn't write her story with equations. She wrote it with foresight, with courage, with the quiet power of a woman who understood that history favors the bold, even when they are unacknowledged. In a world divided by lines of color and gender, she crossed a line no one else dared to. She walked from the world of pencils into the world of code. She carried an entire generation of women with her. And long after computers replaced human hands, NASA would return to her memory, realizing that one of the greatest transformations in their history had been led by a woman the world tried to forget. Dorothy Vaughan did not fear the future. She mastered it. There are figures in history whose brilliance burns brightly in their own time, celebrated, recognized, placed upon pedestals before the dust of their achievements has even settled. And then there are figures whose brilliance burns in the future. Ada Lovelace was the latter. She lived in the early 1800s, a century before machines hummed in laboratories, long before algorithms became the silent rulers of the digital world. She existed in a time when computing was not a field, not a theory, not even a dream. And yet she saw it. She saw the modern world before the modern world knew how to imagine itself. Ada was born Augusta, Ada Byron, the daughter of the infamous poet Lord Byron. Mad, brilliant, destructive, adored. Her mother, Lady Anne Isabella Milbank, was his opposite, rational, mathematical, disciplined. Between these two extremes, Ada Lovelace became something neither parent could have predicted. A visionary, a child who saw mechanical gears and imagined abstractions, a teenager who learned calculus alongside music and French, a woman who looked at a machine in oak and brass and saw not engineering, but possibility. Her life could have unfolded as society expected: marriage, motherhood, polite accomplishments. But from the start, Ada was restless. Her mind leaned toward patterns, toward logic, toward the hidden architecture beneath reality. She wrote to her mother once, "I must have a reason for everything. Something remains ever to be done." It was not a statement of curiosity. It was a philosophy. And then, in her late teens, she met the man who would open the door to her destiny. Charles Babbage, a mathematician, an inventor, a dreamer with ink-stained hands and a machine inside his mind. He showed Ada a model of his difference engine, a mechanical calculator designed to automate astronomical tables. It was a marvel of the age, a puzzle of rotating wheels and metal columns. Most visitors saw complexity. Ada saw the future. While others praised the machine as an impressive calculator, she asked questions that disoriented Babbage. Could a machine like this be generalized? Could it manipulate not just numbers but symbols? Could it follow instructions? Could it be creative? These were not questions of engineering. These were questions of philosophy and computation. Ada had glimpsed a world that did not exist yet. When Babbage began designing a successor to the difference engine, a far more ambitious machine called the analytical engine, Ada knew she had found her intellectual partner. The analytical engine was astonishing for its time. It had memory. It had a processor. It had loops. It had conditional branching. It was, in every meaningful sense, the world's first conceptual computer. And Ada Lovelace became the first person to understand it. In 1843, she translated a French paper describing the analytical engine. But her translation was only the beginning. What followed were her notes, longer than the original paper and infinitely more groundbreaking. Note G, her most famous, contained something that the world would not know how to appreciate for more than a century. A program, an algorithm designed specifically for the analytical engine, the world's first computer program. But it was not simply the code that made her extraordinary. It was the depth of her insight. She understood that the machine could manipulate not only numbers, but anything that could be symbolically expressed. Music, text, logic, patterns, the raw ingredients of thought. She wrote, "The analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns, just as the Jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves." This was more than a metaphor. It was a prophecy. Ada Lovelace understood that machines would one day create worlds, digital landscapes, virtual realities, computations that extended human imagination. She saw that machines would not replace human creativity, but amplify it, collaborate with it, elevate it. She envisioned the computer age in 1843. But like so many visionaries, her brilliance was not recognized in her lifetime. Her work faded into obscurity. Her contributions were overshadowed by Babbage's unfinished prototypes. Her vision lay dormant in archives and dusty mathematics journals. She died at just 36 years old, young, brilliant, misunderstood. But history moves slowly, and sometimes justice takes generations. In the mid-20th century, when computers finally emerged from theory into reality, researchers rediscovered Ada's notes, and suddenly the world realized she had predicted them, all of them. The logic, the structure, the concept of programming, the idea that machines could move beyond numbers, the birth of computational thinking. Ada Lovelace was not merely the first programmer. She was the first to imagine what programming meant. In today's world, her ideas pulse through every microchip, every processor, every line of code that runs silently beneath the devices we hold. She spoke into existence a field that would shape the 21st century more than any invention of the industrial age. Ada saw the soul of computing before computing had a body. And now, her legacy is no longer a footnote. It is the foundation. Her name stands beside the very concept of programming. Her vision defines the digital revolution. Her imagination built a world none of her contemporaries could fathom. She did not live to witness her prophecy fulfilled, but we live in it. Ada Lovelace dreamed of machines that could think, and now we build them. Long before rockets pierced the atmosphere, long before the era of classified aerospace programs and interplanetary ambitions, there was a young girl in Oklahoma who loved puzzles. Mary Golda Ross saw the world differently. While other children played games, she solved problems. While others memorized facts, she asked questions. Mathematics was not merely a subject to her, it was a doorway, a way of understanding the invisible architecture beneath reality. She was born in 1908, a member of the Cherokee Nation, a descendant of Chief John Ross. Her heritage held a deep respect for learning. Cherokee traditions prized education, logic, and the pursuit of knowledge long before the United States ever valued those traits in a woman, let alone a Native American one. But Mary did not grow up in a world eager to welcome her brilliance. She grew up in a country that insisted women did not belong in mathematics, that Native Americans should not dare to enter elite scientific fields, that genius had a single face: white, male, privileged. Mary Golda Ross disagreed. She studied mathematics with a hunger that startled her teachers. She graduated high school at 16. By 20, she had earned a degree in mathematics, one of the few women in the entire state to do so. She taught. She continued her studies. She pushed against every boundary quietly, relentlessly, until the world ran out of excuses to stop her. And then history intervened. World War II erupted, and the United States suddenly needed scientists, engineers, mathematicians, aerodynamicists, problem solvers who could help build machines that had never existed before. So Mary did something bold. She walked into the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation with a resume that defied expectation. She was hired, not as a clerk, not as a secretary, but as a mathematician. One of the first women Lockheed ever brought into its engineering division. Her brilliance became impossible to ignore. She worked on the P-38 Lightning, an aircraft notorious for aerodynamic challenges that baffled experienced engineers. High-altitude flight was unpredictable. Stall patterns were deadly. The equations seemed to contradict themselves. Mary Golda Ross solved the contradictions. She was precise and fearless in her logic. She could see patterns others missed. She found stability in chaos. Her work helped make the P-38 one of the most effective airplanes of the war. But this was only the beginning, because soon the world would look beyond aircraft. The space age was coming, and when Lockheed created its most secretive think tank, a division called Skunk Works, the birthplace of classified aerospace innovation, Mary Golda Ross became the first Native American woman engineer to walk through its doors. She entered a world of blueprints stamped top secret, rooms without windows, projects that were not spoken aloud outside the building. There, she helped design the future. Mary ran trajectory calculations for interplanetary travel. She studied heat shields for high-speed re-entry. She developed designs for rockets that could reach Mars and Venus. She analyzed orbits, escape velocities, gravitational slingshots. She was doing, in the 1950s, the mathematics that would define NASA missions decades later. But secrecy has a price. The world wouldn't know the magnitude of Mary Golda Ross's contributions for most of her life. Her work was locked behind classified walls. Her reports were stamped confidential. Her designs were hidden in government archives. The equations she wrote shaped the space program, but her name was absent from the public record. Still, she continued. Mary believed that science was not about recognition, it was about purpose. She once said, "You do the best you can at the job you're given." But the truth is this: Mary Golda Ross did far more than the job she was given. She co-authored NASA's Planetary Flight Handbook, a document that laid out how spacecraft could travel to other planets. A document so advanced that much of it remained classified for years. She helped develop early satellite technology. She contributed to ballistic missile defense systems. She shaped the theoretical groundwork of human spaceflight. Yet she moved through her career with a quiet humility that made her colleagues revere her. She mentored young engineers. She opened doors for women without announcing she had done so. She carried her heritage with pride, often wearing Cherokee jewelry in the halls of Lockheed as a reminder that brilliance does not come from one culture, one gender, one expected lineage. Near the end of her life, when she was finally asked about her role in aerospace history, Mary smiled with the softness of someone who had made peace with time. My grandfather taught me that education is the one thing no one can take away, and in the end, she became the embodiment of that lesson. Mary Golda Ross built the mathematics of the space age before the space age had a name. She lived as both a mathematician and a guardian of her people's legacy. She walked through locked doors and left them open for the next generation. Today, her story stands as a reminder that genius is not defined by circumstance. It is defined by the courage to follow one's intellect wherever it leads. She was a woman who built the path to the stars and asked for nothing except the chance to keep learning. Mary Golda Ross saw the future. And then she calculated how to reach it. If you're still here, walking alongside these women whose brilliance reshaped our world from the shadows, you're already part of something rare. Most people only know the loudest names in science. You've chosen to follow the quieter ones, the ones history tried to bury. If this journey matters to you, take a moment now, while you're thinking about it, to help it reach further. Pause, hit like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this series. Drop a comment with the name of a woman in science you think the world needs to hear more about. It seems small, one click, one comment, one share, but it's how these stories escape the algorithm's shadows and find the people who were never told them. Let's step back into the cosmos. There are discoveries that expand the world we know. New continents, new particles, new frontiers. And then there are discoveries that expand the world we don't know. Vera Rubin made the second kind. Most scientists spend their lives adding bricks to the wall of knowledge. Vera cracked the wall open and revealed a universe far larger, far stranger, far more mysterious than humanity had ever imagined. But before she rewrote cosmology, she was just a child staring through a bedroom window in Washington, D.C., watching the stars drift over the dark silhouette of the trees. While other children traced constellations, Vera asked questions. Why do stars move the way they do? Why are galaxies shaped the way they are? What forces hold the universe together? She built her first telescope from cardboard tubes. She set up makeshift observatories in her parents' garage. By 10, she had decided to become an astronomer. By her teens, she was meeting with professors, begging for guidance, asking for mentorship, seeking access to a field that gently, politely, repeatedly told her, no. The world didn't want women in astronomy. Graduate programs rejected her. Even as she excelled, even as her curiosity bloomed into genuine scientific insight, she was told, directly, indirectly, institutionally, that she did not belong. But Vera Rubin had something the universe respects: persistence. She pushed her way into Cornell. She completed graduate school. She wrote a master's thesis proposing that galaxies did not appear randomly in space. They rotated around one another in great, vast systems. Her idea was so ahead of its time that astronomers dismissed it outright. She continued anyway. In the 1960s, with a husband and 4 children, she returned to the field, balancing motherhood with midnight observing sessions, carrying children to scientific conferences, because leaving them behind was not an option. She became a researcher at the Carnegie Institution in Washington, and it was there, while studying how galaxies spin, that she encountered the mystery that would change everything. The expectation was simple. Galaxies, like solar systems, should rotate in a predictable way. Stars near the center should move faster. Stars near the edge should move slower. Gravity demanded this. Newton predicted this. Einstein's equations agreed. But when Vera Rubin plotted the rotation curves, the speeds of stars at different distances from the galactic center, she saw something impossible. The stars at the edges were not slowing down. They were moving just as fast as the stars near the center. The numbers were wrong. The models were wrong. The universe was wrong. Or rather, our understanding of it was. Vera checked the calculations. She checked the instruments. She checked for human error, mechanical error, observational error. There was none. What she had discovered was not a mistake. It was a message. Something massive. Something invisible. Something that did not emit light or absorb it, was holding the galaxies together. The stars should have flown apart. The galaxies should have ripped themselves into dust. The universe should have collapsed into chaos. But it didn't. Why? Because something unseen was binding it, supporting it, shaping it. Dark matter. A substance that could not be detected with telescopes, that did not shine, that made no sound, that interacted with the universe only through gravity. Vera Rubin did not invent the idea of dark matter. Others had speculated about it before her, but she provided the first, overwhelming, irrefutable, observational evidence that it was real. Her measurements were so precise, her logic so airtight, her data so consistent that the universe had to be reimagined. Suddenly, everything humanity thought it knew was wrong. The stars we see are only a sliver of reality. The galaxies we map are only outlines of something far larger. The entire cosmos, everything from planetary systems to clusters of galaxies, was filled with an invisible architecture, and it was Rubin who revealed it. But the world was slow, painfully, predictably slow, to recognize the magnitude of her discovery. Her colleagues were celebrated. They received awards. They became household names in the scientific community. And Vera? She kept working. She kept measuring. She kept analyzing. She kept speaking at conferences where men questioned her data, her interpretations, her capacity to understand the very universe she was reshaping. Yet she never raised her voice. She never wavered. She would say, with her characteristic calm, "Science progresses best when observations force us to alter our preconceptions." And that was her gift. She forced the universe to confess its secrets. By the time she died in 2016, astrophysics had finally caught up to her. Dark matter became not a fringe theory, but a central pillar of cosmology. Every modern model of the universe depends on it. Every simulation of galaxy formation requires it. Every astrophysicist, every cosmologist, every student of the universe stands on the foundation she built. Even now, more than 90% of the universe remains unseen, and yet we know it is there, because Vera Rubin revealed its shadow. She expanded the cosmos not by discovering what is visible, but by illuminating what is not. She did not receive the Nobel Prize, not because her work lacked value, but because, like so many women before her, she did her greatest work in a world still learning how to recognize greatness. But history remembers. History whispers her name whenever dark matter appears in lecture halls and research papers, whenever astrophysicists simulate galaxy formation, whenever we gaze into the night sky and wonder what remains hidden. Vera Rubin did not simply rewrite astronomy. She rewrote reality. She taught us that the universe is larger than our senses, richer than our instruments, stranger than our imagination, and still waiting to be understood. There are discoveries so extraordinary that when the truth finally emerges, the world resists them. Not because the evidence is weak or the logic is flawed, or the scientist lacks brilliance, but because the world is simply not ready to accept that its understanding of reality has been wrong. Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin learned this at 19. She grew up in England, a quiet girl with a restless mind, a child who saw patterns not just in books, but in nature itself. The arc of a leaf, the tilt of the stars, the strange order behind things most people considered random. She devoured mathematics, physics, chemistry, anything that could explain the universe with precision or poetry. But England in the early 20th century was not a place where women were meant to become scientists. Cambridge allowed her to study, but not to earn a degree. She could complete the coursework, master the material, surpass her male peers, but the institution refused to acknowledge her achievement. It didn't matter. Cecilia Payne wasn't chasing recognition. She was chasing truth, and truth drew her across an ocean. She arrived at Harvard College Observatory in 1923, only 23 years old, and stepped into a world that was just beginning to use photography to decode the night sky. For centuries, astronomers had looked at stars through telescopes and measured their brightness, their colors, their motions. But no one knew what stars were. Were they made of the same elements as Earth? Did they share our chemistry, our structure, our origins? Or were they something entirely different? These were questions older than science itself, and Cecilia Payne was about to answer them. Her task was to study stellar spectra, the rainbow fingerprints stars leave behind when their light is separated. Each element has a signature pattern, a coded series of lines. If interpreted correctly, a spectrum could reveal a star's composition. But the field was full of assumptions. Astronomers believed stars were made mostly of iron, the most stable and common heavy element on Earth. It made intuitive sense. Heavy elements accumulated in planets, so surely stars had them too. Cecilia stared at the spectral plates and saw something else. The hydrogen lines, faint, ignored, misunderstood, were too strong to be dismissed. And the helium lines, delicate but unmistakable, were everywhere. It didn't make sense. It didn't match the textbooks. It didn't align with any accepted theory. So she did the single most dangerous thing a young scientist can do. She trusted her own mind. She began calculating, line by line, spectrum by spectrum, star by star, and the numbers repeated themselves with ruthless consistency. Stars are not made primarily of Earth-like elements. Stars are oceans of hydrogen. Stars are carved from helium. Stars are burning spheres of the simplest atoms in the universe. In other words, the universe was not built from Earth. Earth was built from the universe. It was the most important discovery in the history of astrophysics. But when she submitted her doctoral thesis, the first astrophysics PhD ever awarded at Harvard, senior astronomer Henry Norris Russell advised her to soften her conclusion. Not because he disagreed, because he believed no one would accept it. So Cecilia Payne wrote the most painful sentence of her scientific life, a caution that her results might be wrong. They were not wrong. 4 years later, Russell himself published work confirming her conclusion. He received the credit. His name became the one tied to the discovery. The world forgot the woman who had solved the mystery first. And yet Cecilia never expressed bitterness. She kept working, kept observing, kept calculating the life cycles of stars, their births, their deaths, their transformations into supernovae and white dwarfs. Her contributions became the backbone of modern stellar astronomy. But she lived in an era that refused to promote women, refused to pay them equally, refused to recognize their leadership. She worked for decades before Harvard, finally, reluctantly, appointed her as a full professor. She became the first woman to hold such a position in the university's history. And when she taught, she spoke of the stars not as distant, cold objects, but as living things, evolving, burning, collapsing, scattering elements across the cosmos. Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin revealed that the universe is fundamentally different from what we assumed. She replaced a cosmos of heavy metals with a cosmos of hydrogen fire. She showed that the chemistry of stars is the chemistry of creation itself. Today, her discovery forms the basis of every astrophysics textbook, every star chart, every model of stellar evolution, every theory of galactic history. She changed the world the moment she declared what stars are made of, and for decades, the world ignored her voice. But stars do not care about the politics of credit or recognition. They burn whether we understand them or not. They shine whether we acknowledge their truth. They fill the darkness with light, regardless of who names them. And Cecilia Payne taught us how to read that light. She restored the universe to its true form, a universe of hydrogen, a universe of helium, a universe more elegant than any myth, more elemental than any story, more ancient than anything Earth could offer. Her discovery did not simply reveal the stars, it revealed us. Because the hydrogen and helium that fill the cosmos became the atoms that fill our own bodies. We are the descendants of Cecilia Payne's revelation. We are the children of her equation. The universe is written in a language of fire, and she was the first to read it. When we look back across the centuries, across chalk-stained desks and dim observatories, across laboratories humming with electricity, across libraries lost to fire and wars and time, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The history of science is not a straight line. It is a constellation, a vast, interconnected sky of minds whose brilliance glows long after their lives have passed. Some are bright enough to be seen from anywhere. Some are so faint that only the most patient eyes ever find them. And some, the most extraordinary of all, were hidden, intentionally or by accident, behind the glare of louder names. In this chapter of our journey, we walked beside women whose light was obscured, whose stories were reshaped or erased, whose discoveries built the very foundation of the modern world. Women who were told no, again and again and again, and still pushed past every barrier placed before them. We followed Katherine Johnson as she bent gravity itself into equations, guiding astronauts safely through the void. We watched Dorothy Vaughan step into the dawn of the computer age and teach herself the language of the future long before the world understood how much it needed her. We listened to Ada Lovelace whisper a prophecy across a century, imagining algorithms and computing long before machines ever hummed to life. We stood with Mary Golda Ross in the quiet halls of secret laboratories, where she mapped trajectories not only through the atmosphere, but toward other worlds. We heard Vera Rubin reveal the invisible, the dark matter that binds the universe together, and witnessed the cosmos expand under her observations. And then we stepped into the brilliance of Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, who told humanity for the first time what stars are made of, and whose truth reshaped astrophysics forever. Each of these women carried a different piece of the universe. Each offered a different key. Each held a different door open. But together, they reveal something larger than any single discovery. The story of science is incomplete without them. They are not footnotes. They are not appendices. They are not supporting characters in a narrative written by men. They are the architects of our understanding. They are the foundation beneath the world we now take for granted. They are the quiet supernovas whose brilliance was visible only when someone finally chose to look. And now, we look. We look with recognition, with reverence, with the humility to admit that we have misunderstood our own history, because science was never built by a handful of great men. It was built by countless minds, many of them working in shadows they never deserved to stand in. But now the shadows are lifting. With every story we uncover, with every name we say aloud, with every hidden contribution brought back into the light, the tapestry of scientific history becomes more complete, more honest, more beautiful. And yet, our journey is not finished. There are more names, more stories, more forgotten brilliance waiting in the margins of textbooks, in archived journals, in dusty laboratory notebooks, in the silence between what is remembered and what is true. In our next chapter, we will continue to resurrect them. Scientists whose discoveries shaped medicine, engineering, technology, mathematics, and the very rhythm of human progress. Their eras may differ, their fields may vary, their challenges may take new forms, but their stories are united by a single truth. Genius has always existed everywhere. It simply wasn't always acknowledged. If you've reached this moment, if you've listened, learned, questioned, felt, then you are part of something rare. You are part of the restoration of history. So let this not be the end of a story, but the beginning of a responsibility. To remember, to honor, to seek the truth behind the silence, to refuse the incomplete version of the past we were handed, to celebrate brilliance wherever, or in whomever, it is found. Because the universe is not shaped by the names we know. It is shaped by the names we forgot. Thank you for traveling with us through the hidden constellations of science, through the minds that expanded the world while the world refused to expand for them, through the stories that remind us that knowledge is not a privilege, it is a legacy. If this journey moved you, enlightened you, challenged the way you see history, don't let it end here. Subscribe so you never miss the next episode. Like this video, so these stories reach those who need to hear them. Share it with someone who still believes that genius comes wrapped in a single form. And until the next journey, stay curious.